All right. Are we live?
I'm not sure if we're live. I'm getting a little bar here.
It says up on my top left corner, it says meeting is now streaming live.
We are live. We are now live for sure.
We are live on Facebook. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome, Matt. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How's the marathon? How are you doing on the marathon?
You know what's actually happened is that everyone that was like really eager to do one and like, you know, would just drop what they were doing or just boom, ready to go. I've gotten to most of them. So everyone else is requiring a lot of scheduling and work. So it's kind of slowed down a lot. But I want everyone to know they have not slowed down because I've slowed down. They have slowed down because I got all the movers and shakers. Now I got the people that you know.
All right.
But, you know, I don't want to. That sounds bad. Like I'm talking bad about everyone else who's still on. But like, it's just kind of like a lot of the people that were ready to go at a drop of a hat. I got them. So now it's more like it's taking more scheduling, more this, more that. So there's been a dip in productivity, but that's not on my end.
Okay. All right. Productivity. Productivity. I like the way you put that. Okay. Well, I'm glad to be here and always glad to be in conversation with you, Matt, about Kapital and Karl Marx. And today, as a matter of fact, there's just one thing I should note by way of introduction, that I'm always happy to engage with folks in discussion, and I really welcome your comments and questions. I know Matt does as well, and we look forward to engaging with you at the last portion, or the last third of the portion of today's show. So having said that, Matt, I'd like to share a quote, a saying, something that I've heard at different moments throughout my life, saying in Spanish that I think helps to contextualize and to get the show started, you know, to get the ball rolling as far as money. And section 3 of chapter 3, the section titled Money, part of chapter 3 called Money or the Circulation of Commodities. Anyway, the saying, I don't know if it's particularly a Mexican saying, but I do know it's a saying in Spanish, and it goes the following way. It says, El que aparta y reparte, le toca la mejor parte. And what that means is he or she who is positioned to distribute is the person who obtains the best portion. I wonder if you've ever heard something similar, a similar saying, a quote, or whatever in English. Does that saying
like
ring any bell?
The golden rule, like he who has the gold makes the rules.
Something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
I suppose that's a fair discussion, or fair kind of approximation of the saying, although it doesn't quite say the same thing. But I think it's relevant and useful nevertheless. You know, today's discussion is of course about money, and money as it is outlined in this particular section of chapter 3. And the discussion is useful because it gives us an opportunity to understand something that I introduced last week. You might remember, Matt, that I proposed the idea, the abstraction, the understanding that if we live simultaneously on different maps, right, that some of these maps are superimposed upon others. I was talking about the exchange that takes place between people, and that these exchanges, these economic exchanges that take place between people, of course, take place themselves on a larger economic map. Anyway, section 3 here of chapter 3 in Marx really helps us to get at the some of the corresponding intricacies, some of the corresponding bridges between each of these maps in terms of, well, obviously in terms of money, but also in terms of related understandings about currency. But before we get there, before we get into all this like theoretical stuff, I'm interested in getting your thoughts about this saying or this quote, and how you believe it might be useful from your perspective to contextualize today's discussion.
Let me repeat it one more time so I can
Sure, sure. El que aparta y reparte, le toca la mejor parte. And of course, is masculinist. He who divides and distributes gets the best
right
portion.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think I remember reading somewhere like, the word lord actually comes from like the loaf dealer or something like that, or something like that. So something about that, like how, a lot of these, even the language we use today, a lot of language we use today that would indicate that you're the one that like actually puts it out. It's when you have the ability to distribute, that's when you're able to when you're in charge of the distribution, that becomes like you have the ability to like,
Yeah.
the ability to skim off the top, as they say. If you think about it, I mean, like, it's true. I mean, if you think about it just like as a general criminal enterprise, I mean, like, or as a general, I mean, like, what's criminality? I mean, like, if you think about it just like a general exploitative enterprise, those who are in charge of dealing out the deck, or dealing the deck, obviously are going to, they're going to keep some for themselves. So, like, there's a very particular role the banker plays in the capitalist mode of production. I mean, there's a very, very particular role, and and within that, I mean, like they are largely, they're largely in our time and age. I mean, it's so divorced from so much of what actual production is, from how the thing started.
Yeah.
But it's always been that kind of way. I mean, there's always been speculation. There's always been this kind of, like, financing arm of like industrial capital, right? And even within industrial capitals, they had like financial wings to their enterprises, and the banks themselves did certain things. But in our era, in the last, I'd say probably 20, 30 years, this has exploded to just like proportions where it doesn't even resemble anything that. I mean, I think about like the movie like The Big Short, right? To think about like how far. I mean, The Big Short's kind of a ridiculous movie. It's kind of, I think it gets way too much credit. I mean, you think about the scene where like Brad Pitt is like, like, you just bet against the American economy, you should be ashamed of yourself. Well, he helped them do it. I mean, like, like he's like, I just made these millions, but like I have a heavy heart about it, or something like that. It's just a very bizarre kind of movie. Wall Street's also a bizarre movie, where Oliver Stone writes in that the Wall Street has a role, and investors has a role, and investment has a role, and that it's become irresponsible, and that's the problem, right? The heroes of The Big Short are a bunch of people who are looking to short the economy, right? And bet on the ship, but they have guilty conscience about it, or they think, oh my God, you fools, how dare you, right? Like, how dare you do this? And so, trying to find heroes within like the speculative capital, both in the case of Wall Street and in the case of The Big Short. So they're kind of ridiculous films, but they do point to like just how both of them in their time point to just how divorced this kind of money becomes from production, right? So even when Marx is writing, the money is an abstraction. It's an abstraction pulled from production, because at the end of the day, this chapter is kind of interesting. But in order to understand this chapter, you have to like look at the previous chapters, really describing money as being representative of dead labor, right? And so like this is the ability, but you can't have a bank account full of dead labor. Like, what I'm saying? Like that itself is just a phrase, So you can't. So it has to be represented in something that can accumulate and you can hoard. But when you really think about what they are doing, is when they have a bank account. Let's say Jeff Bezos has like a bank account of how many billions and billions of dollars. Well, a certain amount of that, in the old style would be that he has this vault of your blood, sweat, and tears. He doesn't have a vault of money. He doesn't have a vault of just paper. He has a vault of paper that represents your blood, sweat, and tears. But increasingly, okay, so that's the base of it. He's got this a vault of your blood, sweat, and tears. But a lot of what he has is actually not necessarily from the actual sales of Amazon, but it's from the stock evaluation of Amazon, right? So he really has much more than your blood, sweat, and tears he has in his vault are bets made upon his ability to gather your blood, sweat, and tears.
And to gather tomorrow's.
And to gather tomorrow's blood, sweat, and tears, right?
So he just doesn't possess today; he possesses tomorrow.
He
at least under the current framework.
He possesses what people believe. Yes, he possesses what is believed. The amount of blood, sweat, and tears it is believed he can later at some point in time accrue. Yeah.
Yeah, which is actually part and parcel of some of the discussion that takes place today. So having said that, I think it'd be really interesting to kind of begin the empirical portion of the discussion, the tangible, real world nuts and bolts, where the rubber meets the road discussion about this particular chapter within the context of the current crisis. I don't know. I'm not certain that the crisis should be identified as one that is originally tied. In fact, I know it shouldn't be. Conceptualized this way, but popular discussion is such that it often is. That the economic crisis is rooted in the contemporary health crisis. Let's pretend that narrative is accurate. Let's pretend that narrative is true. And at least for the sake of this particular discussion this afternoon, Matt, there are a couple ways to understand the crisis. Then, as far as the health crisis is concerned, there are those societies, or there are those governments, right, that have done much to regulate the health economy / health industry. And then, of course, there are those other societies, other nations that have, well, to use a term that you just used a few moments ago, that have speculated, I will conclude, that have speculated on the moment and have correspondingly have deregulated the health industry and the health economy. And for these, to characterize these distinctions, it's useful to think about currency. It's useful to think about coin, or if you will, it's useful to think about money as the abstraction of coin, or money as the abstraction of currency.
Yeah.
So in those societies where the health economy and the health industry has been deregulated, of course, there's been a push to release currency. There's been a push to release coin, right? And ironically, perhaps, right, now the push is not simply to go to the mall as it had been about 15 years ago or so, right? Now the push is even beyond, making purchases on Amazon. The push is to get us to go to the beach, right? To get us to go to the beach and go to the bars and correspondingly go to church.
Right.
Consume some variation, of a of an element that that stupefies. and go to another place that also has the capacity to occlude and blur our vision of reality. Anyway, so having said that about those governments and those state systems that would deregulate the health economy, contrasted to those, of course, are those states and those societies, those governments that have regulated the health economy. And what they have done, right, is in addition to promoting physical distance between and among different people in society, right? One of the things that they pursued, they had challenge, of course, doing so, because of course, not everybody is within those particular states, or not everybody within those particular societies is on board with this solution, is to contain currency, to contain coins, to use the language of chapter 3. Anyway, so one would have folks, at least on the surface, it appears, one would have folks not simply release currency in the market, right, but participate in corresponding economies, labor economies, of course, right, that would obligate them to these deregulated industries. And then, of course, the other one would have the opposite effect. And before, go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's you know, in chapter 3, section 3, he talks about, you know, he says directly, since money does not reveal what has been transformed into it, everything, commodity or not, is convertible into money. So he says, like, you know, the fact of the matter is that, like, you know, whether we're talking about a diamond, or whether we're talking about 20 minutes of your time, whether we're talking about the ability to, you're going to sell me a machine, you're going to sell me, like, you know, a certain amount of oil, you're going to sell me a certain amount of fish, you're going to give me rights to an area, you're going to, you know, whatever that may be, these things are all convertible into money. You know, these things are all convertible into this universal kind of coin. And so I think that's like the first, I mean, because when we're talking about these larger things you're talking about the idea that, like, we're just going to print money in order to, like, keep things going, right? So in order for the world, you know, in order for this thing to get done, we're going to, because everything gets very wonky and political when we talk about, like, the coinage, and we talk about, like, you know, like how the budget, and we talk about, like, printing out money to this. But what we're really talking about is, like, get the guy to go over there, pick up the toothpick, hand it to me, right? Like that we're really talking about human action, right? So in order, it's like, okay, let's make these things to do these things, to do that thing. But money is it's like, it's almost like the wire that, like, connects the electrical current of our human activity, right? So, like, let's say we need to get these things. It's an emergency. We need to get these masks out there. All right. Well, where will we get the money? Well, we will print the money, and we'll do that, right? So in that context, you have a situation where one of the members of the squad, Rashida Tlaib, I think her name is, proposed that we print a $2 trillion coin, I think it was, right? And so, or we mint a $2 trillion coin. Now, why would this coin be worth $2 trillion? Like, what could possibly be in a coin that would make it worth $2 trillion? I mean, I don't even think, like, that size, like, you know, concentrated plutonium is worth $2 trillion. Like, what is, like, a piece of the moon? I mean, what are we talking about here? Like, is it, like, you know, what would be worth?
That's what it is. It's the same sort of thing that we were talking about. I mean, you know, generally speaking, of course, it's the same sort of understanding that we were tossing around a few moments ago in terms of, you know, Jeff Bezos, where he has some document, right, that says that he has in some vault somewhere, you know, some X amount of incredible amount of money. But you and I, of course, know that he doesn't have the money in any tangible form. It's just a promise that that document that he has is simply a promise that someday in the future, if he so wishes, he can turn that paper in and receive coin in return. I don't know if he'll ever do that, but that's what that document represents, right? So it's a bet on tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And that $2 trillion, or that, you know, that coin that you're talking about is essentially the same thing. It's in this case, it's the state, right? To the extent that the state has its hands upon the coin, it's the state saying the same thing. In this case, however, where Jeff Bezos has the industry under his command and has state institutions under his command and has politics under his command, there is, in our estimation, in the public's estimation, a greater expectation that that document is going to give us some return, or is going to give Jeff Bezos some return the day that he goes in to cash it in. The opposite is the case to the extent that we don't trust the squad, you know, or sheet of paper, you know. It's to that extent that we are iffy, we are suspicious, we are ill at ease that that coin has any particular value, either today or tomorrow. I don't know if this, I don't know if I'm making myself clear or not. You know, your feedback would be.
No, well, but they also proposed this in 2008 for the bailout. A different, I don't remember who, maybe it might be a Republican that time. I mean, whether it's Republican or Democrat. I mean, this proposal that we are going to print money that does not exist, right? And it's not so much the money. It's not like, because even the dollar bills, we're more familiar with that. We're familiar, like, oh, look at those are dollar bills right there. That's a certain amount of dollar bills. Okay, now we printed those dollar bills, and we printed those dollar bills because we have the right to do that. But now you're telling me you're going to create coin, a single coin, and it's worth $1 trillion. Why is it worth $1 trillion? It is worth $1 trillion because we say it is worth $1 trillion, and it's just this bizarre game that we play. And it's when you really think about it, because what we're really talking about is the need to produce medical equipment, and we can't just produce it. Money has to be involved somehow. Well, we don't really have that money. I don't know where that money is. All right, well, we'll create money. So, like, imagine if you and I were to, like, say, like, you know what, like, let's build a table together, right? And then I say, well, Jose, if I'm gonna come and help you build this table, you're gonna have to pay me. And you're like, we said, well, I don't really have any money to pay you right now. It's not part of my budget right now. I'm like, okay, I'll tell you what we're gonna do. We're gonna go inside. You're gonna write down on a piece of paper and cut that paper in half, and you're gonna tell me that paper is money, and I will agree to you that is money, and now you will give it to me, and now I have this money. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, what are we doing? It's a ridiculous way to organize life. It's a ridiculous organization of the human species. I mean, at the end of the day, we're part of the animal kingdom. I mean, this is a ridiculous way for us to do things. It's a layer of complication that we add to things that in the middle of a health crisis cannot be suspended, because people cannot interact unless there is a commercial thing standing in between them. So even when the government, which is, not officially a capitalist entity, wants to, it's supposed to regulator of capitalism, right? Yeah. Wants to intervene and do something, they have to produce money, because there's nothing that can happen in this world if money is not involved.
It's just that, the contemporary presidential administration is an extension of previous Republican administrations. And of course, I'm not leaving the Democrats, what's the saying, off the hook here. But, I happen to be talking about a Republican presidential administration and its relationship to preceding ones. If in 1980 or in the 1979 presidential campaigns, 1980 presidential campaigns, the narrative was to change government as we know it, right? And if that meant undermining and sabotaging any of the kind of social welfare guarantees that had existed up to that point, the contemporary Republican presidential administration, in correspondence with the last set of presidential administrations over the last 30 years, is taking that mandate to the nth level and has had devastating consequences, not just for labor industries, but for the very lifeblood of people in our society. Has had devastating consequences for us today in the current pandemic moment. I'm getting ahead of myself, I suppose, a little bit. I don't know if I provided some response to what you were talking about just a few moments ago. I think you're muted on my side, Matt.
Yeah, no. I mean, no, that I mean, the bottom line is that in the midst of the pandemic, we cannot get anything done, and we cannot get anything done because money mitigates all human interaction because there's money involved in every single aspect of human life, right? Because in order for one thing to happen, another thing to happen, there is the intervention of finance. There's the intervention of money. Nothing can be done, and I think that the pandemic really illustrates that. I mean, in a previous discussion, I made this kind of like joke about an allegory of a bear, right? So the bear knows there's food in a restaurant. The bear simply walks to the back of the restaurant and begins to eat. The man sits outside the the coffee shop and starts or the diner and starts like singing a song with a hat asking for money. So I mean, like that, and so that he can go in because the man is smart and the bear is dumb, right? And that's the kind of like the way we think, and it's a ridiculous way of organizing life. And with the intentions of the people that end up running the system, it ends up producing a world where there are billionaires and there are beggars, and it's really not. I mean, I know these are our discussions. It's really not any more complicated than that. I mean, it's really quite simple. We live in a world of gross deprivation, and we live in a world of incredible disgusting excess. And increasingly in this time period, much more so than previous time periods, it is based upon nothing. It is based upon stock evaluation. It's based upon bets upon bets upon bets upon bets, living in this kind of like bizarre derivative market. I mean, all that stuff that happened in 2008, all those critiques, all that hasn't changed. The fact of the matter is that the derivative market is still way larger than the gross world product. The fact that there are bets on bets on bets on bets on bets keeping this whole thing afloat. Now, the reason I think that the reason that is not necessarily just because the bankers got a hold of everything and they've run wild and they finally outwitted the industrialist and all that kind of thing. No. It's because so much of what Marx described with the labor being infused into all these different products, a lot of that has been either offshored or completely automated to the point where it's just gone. That labor just disappears from a world of labor. What he describes, not necessarily as an individual laborer, but a world of labor, right? Well, that world of labor is decreasing in its in size and scope, right? Now you can say that there's still like sweatshops, there's still this, there's still that. Yeah, there are, but I mean, but increasingly we're looking at like that's not the same thing. That's not the same thing as like the shirt that's produced in that factory will be bought by the people who live just outside of it. No, that's not what we're talking about anymore. We're talking about a world wherein like people are receiving substandard wages. They're not intended to make the Nike and then buy the Nike. That's not what's happening, right? It's at least not at the price that the Nike is intended to be sold, right? So even that sweatshop labor, that's a different thing than what Marx was describing. It's different than what Marx was describing. And so we live in a world now where the only way you're going to keep the market afloat is through these bizarre speculative means. You know what I'm saying? We live in a world where we talk about the jobs of tomorrow, but like again, like eHarmony has more questions of compatibility than employees. Twitter, which is one of the large corporations, the large Silicon Valley corporations, has something like 4,000 engineers. I mean, we're talking about these are not going to replace the Ford Auto factory. These are not going to replace the jobs of yesteryear. You're not going to replace GM. You're not going to replace all these different major corporations that they will not be replaced in terms of like picking up the slack in terms of laborers. So that kind of job tomorrow, get ready for this, get ready for that, all that ITT, DeVry commercials, that's not true. None of that's true. You're not going to be able to be employed in the same kind of way, or it's not going to employ the same millions upon millions of people in that process. So given that, in order to save the market, you have to do all these bizarre speculative things to keep this shell of capitalism going. But it's not really capital in the way it's been described throughout the centuries.
There's this contemporary economic moment that we experience, of course, is still rooted in production, however distant the production is from the shores and the borders of the United States. Things are still getting produced. Now, of course, our garments are getting produced in Sri Lanka, if they're not getting produced in Bangladesh, et cetera. But as distance has been colonized by contemporary capitalism, so too has time been colonized by contemporary capitalism. In other words, contemporary capitalism does much, right? As I was laying out earlier, right, to narrow the divide between today and tomorrow. In any case, I was thinking about various syntheses that could be obtained on the basis of the discussion that takes place in this particular chapter, in this particular section. And having laid out that that there's a relationship between the first map that's superimposed upon the second map, and then having laid out the understanding that the exchanges that take place on the first map, of course, are rooted in the exchange of commodities, money commodity on the one side, and then some use value commodity on the opposite side. My $3 for your white T-shirt, or whatever it is, whatever it happens to be. We also understand, right, that those relationships take place upon a second map, and that second map has an overarching substructural, if you will, connection to the first. A simultaneous one, right, where there's power above and power from below, acting upon the interactions that take place between and among different people, and where currency, where coin, where dollars, where pesos, where pounds, where francs, whatever, where euros happen to be the medium of exchange. It's this notion that the currency, i.e. money, has value, right, that normalizes and rationalizes the exchanges that take place on the plane of existence. It speaks to that confusion that seems to escape our understanding, that after all, as you put it, Matt, I'm sorry, Matt, after all, as you put it earlier, Matt, right, we are all a part of the flora and the fauna. We are all a part of the animal kingdom. What are we doing playing these games that have deleterious impact upon us? And the fact is that not only do the machinations and the interest and the political and economic pursuits of the people handling the levers of society, not only do they extend the practices that have led to particular moments, the economic practices that have led to the current moment, right? But they're also hoarders as they are, greedy as they are, right? Work to reproduce those relations that facilitate their accumulation, their hoarding. Yeah. And so a part and parcel of those levers right, is their levers on governmentality, levers on banking, levers on Wall Street. And this also serves to speak to your critique of these, popular liberal understandings that somehow Wall Street is some kind of neutral channel through which the economy is handled.
Yeah.
And you and I know that that's not true.
Right.
They are as much, Wall Street and its bureaucrats are complicit in our existence. There's a couple things that maybe I'm speaking too much. I want to speak. I want to address a couple other things, but I'll be quiet for a few moments to hear you out.
Okay.
Go ahead if you want to respond.
I want to be clear, but when I'm talking about Wall Street here, I mean in the film, I forget there's a character. Okay, so there's Gordon Gekko and Bud Fox. Those are the two major characters, right? But then there's another character that works in the office with them. I think he's played. He's a character actor. He's very familiar. He plays the character of Hal. He plays the character. His real name is Hal Holbrook, right? That's the real actor's name. But he plays the character Lou Mannheim, and Lou Mannheim is like the moral voice of Wall Street, right? So he's not the primary character, but he has this speech where he closes the door and tells him, this is what Wall Street's really about. This is the role the investor really has, right? And then Charlie Sheen's dad, Martin Sheen's in the film, and Martin Sheen is he's the good industrial producer. He's the guy that cares about his workers. And all this is such lies. But this is it's very typical of Wallerstone, which is where the solution can be found within the system. There's problems with the system, but solutions can be found within it, right? So
our contemporary Charles Dickens.
yeah. So Wallerstone's not a bad guy. I mean, he's not a bad filmmaker, but the problem was that they killed JFK. Yeah. Not to speak to the fact that JFK killed so many Vietnamese, right, and set the stage for LBJ and Richard Nixon to kill millions of Vietnamese, right? But he's the one that set the stage for that.
Yeah, pigs invaded.
The invasion of Cuba. I mean, the Bay of Pigs. I mean, there's so many different things that John F. Kennedy did as just an agent of imperialism, no different than those before or after him. But again, Oliver Stone will say this is like the shining moment, the Camelot that was lost. This moment that was this great reformer, right? Well, similarly in Wall Street, he has characters who would be these people who are standing up for what Wall Street should be, right? When the reality is that Wall Street should not be. Wall Street should not be. I mean, that's Wall Street is this thing capitalism itself is parasitic, but the speculators are parasitic from capital. I mean, within capital, it's like an additional parasite. It's a parasite on a parasite. We're talking about it's kind of funny talking about Oliver Stone in the movie JFK. He's got the character that says it's a riddle wrapped in an enigma, trapped in a mystery or something like that, right? Well, Wall Street is it's a parasite on a parasite. It's a leech. It's a mosquito sitting on a leech. You know what I'm saying? Of capital. This is speculative bankers. This is what money is. This is what the money exchanges are. Capital itself, the industrialist already is an exploiter of people, right? But then when you add this level of speculation, of finance, where now we're talking about and the industrialists themselves. I mean, we could categorize Jeff Bezos as an industrialist. I mean, Bill Gates is an industrialist. These people, they make a lot of their value, their money they make is not from the sale of their products, but from the evaluation of their corporation, right? So they themselves are also involved in the speculative. There's not this big distinction between here are the bankers and here are the industrialists. No. This is the industrialists itself. The industrialists themselves. Ford doesn't make money. Ford doesn't make cars. They make money, right? Like the industrialists themselves are involved in this whole thing. So, but that aspect of capital is like a parasite over a parasite. You know what I'm saying? It's very layered, but at the end of the day, it's really simple. It's really simple. Like people are being robbed of their time and energy, and then people are from that initial robbery are making bets on bets, which devalue or which divorce these bets on bets on bets on bets, known as money, from the actual source from which they arrived. So it's really just a house of cards. That's you know that a house of cards stacked to the height of skyscrapers.
There's a discussion in this particular section of chapter 3 concerning uh, the relationships, the tensions that exist in the economy, um, uh, where it's almost a schizophrenic existence that capitalism has with itself, and that is that on the one hand, it needs to release coinage, in order to survive, but simultaneously, it must keep the reins on coinage. It must keep the reins on currency. Otherwise, the economy will lose control, or they will lose, capitalism will lose control of the economy. And I'm thinking about this particular tension, right? Because in the contemporary moment, of course, we are living a crisis, and I'm interested to understand the contemporary crisis in relation to this. Is it a moment, is it a moment when so much currency has been released in society that it no longer has value, that, these $1 trillion coins, if you will, have been released in the economy, and there's nothing to substantiate it, nothing to back it up? Or is it on the opposite side? Is it a case of that not enough value, or rather not enough coins, or not enough production is taking place, such that we are living the contemporary economic crisis that we happen to be experiencing at the moment? I've read in certain spaces, that the contemporary crisis, or at least the crisis that we had been living up to about 3 weeks ago, was a consequence of all this hoarding, all this accumulation. And if that's the case, then bizarre as this might sound, bizarre as this sounds, the Trumpian proposal to release currency and to engage in exchange might be the solution.
It's hard to say, but I mean, but the main thing is that, like, for me, like, everything begins with like a technological revolution. Like that is the genesis of everything, right? So it does not begin in the financial sector. It does not begin in the change of politics. It does not begin with neoliberalism become the political ideology of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. It begins with the automation of the factory, and everything else is a ripple effect from that. So whatever Trump proposes, whatever the politicians propose, you cannot hold this back any more than you could hold back the Industrial Revolution. The fact that we're going through a technological revolution is going to have political manifestations, and it may take 100 years. I mean, the Industrial Revolution took 100 years. I mean, the formation of capital, as we understood it, took hundreds of years. So, like, when people say, like, well, this idea that automation's been around for a long time, and no, it's really this way. No. I mean, things change. You know what I'm saying? Like, the world, you can't freeze time to the solutions of 1917 and say, like, that's the way the world is and the way the world's always been. That was true in 1917. There were things that were true in 1848 when Marx wrote this. But to say that those things are still true today, no, there are things that were true in 1612. That weren't true in 1848, and there were things true in 1848 that weren't true in 1917, and there are definitely things true in 1917 that aren't true today. So, like, so there are, the things keep moving, right? There's a constant progression, and we're moving into this new thing. And to say that, like, well, that idea has been a long run. I mean, I'm telling you, my entire life has been shaped by the fact that factory labor is not a viable option. It's not a viable common option for millions of people. My entire life has been shaped by that. I worked in retail my whole life. I'm the first person to do that, right? And then kind of I'm weird, so I made this weird escape route. But my generation of people had like 8 different jobs, and I had a job here for 6 months, a job there for 2 months, a job, and that is my entire generation. You cannot tell me that does not have to do with automation. That is absolutely fundamentally because of automation. That's how it affected my generation. The next generation affected even more deeply, and the next generation even more deeply than that. So this is an ongoing process. So to say that no, that's not scientific. That's not Marxist, so to speak. But we do have some. I did share this in a couple places so that we could have a live discussion in more than just one place on my page.
Sure.
And so we do have the questions in a few different places. So do you want to go to questions now?
Sure, go for it.
All right. So let's start with the questions from Marxist discussion group, Marxist glossary discussion. Marx really did have, question from Martin's ear. Marx really did have a handle on how capitalism revolutionizes the mode of production. The theory that automation will place human labor has been around for a long time. Paper money enables commodity production and capital accumulation. Imperialism and colonialism were also around during Marx's work. Currency has exchange value, commodities have use value. Can you discuss the fallacies of modern monetary theory? Well, without delving into the ins and outs of what is called modern monetary theory, I would just say that the idea that money could just exist independent of production is itself a fallacy and makes the whole thing just it makes the whole thing like a worthless enterprise. It's kind of imagine if you try to do sociology without people, right? You can't do sociology without individual people. You can't just have sociology that exists, like the sociology of the clouds. Well, already I can tell you about this theory. It's nonsense. So this idea of money existing independent of production or people or workers or owners or the whole thing that called money into being, it's absurd.
Yeah. Well, in a section here, of course, Marx writes. I'm not gonna look for it now, but a word that he uses really struck my attention. He says, "Money is congealed labor," or so. Yeah, absolutely. At least money within the capitalist society, right, is congealed labor. So if we're going to understand capital, and now I'm talking about the economy, not necessarily just the book, then we need to premise that understanding on the fact that money is congealed human labor. Money is congealed blood, sweat, and tears, as we sometimes use the phrase in this program. Yeah, absolutely. San has chimed in. Welcome, San. Thank you, Martin, for your question contribution. San Yewan Ipalnemoa asks, is our economy still a purely commodities market? If so, then the Gothic Marxist analysis holds. In a commodity economy, the relations of production, class relations, distribution of property, are obscured, and privately produced commodities are socialized through exchange. But if we are no longer based on the commodity form, what is it that we are? And I'd like to reassert that the map of our existence, where it is I exchange my coins or my plastic for a garment, that particular map exists superimposed upon a very different map than the map that had existed 50 years ago, for instance, or 60 years ago, for that matter. In other words, as production has been moved offshore, and to the extent that currency, money, coins are bets on tomorrow's production, we might then also say that commodities continue to be not just the basis of our exchange, but commodities that are going to be in production tomorrow are also going to be the basis of our exchange. The thing is that, as I remember reading in one of Castro's narratives some time ago, and then in keeping with his understanding of Marx, right, the wick is getting closer and closer to the bottom of the candle, and eventually, we're going to reach a catastrophe, a crisis that will have no solution if we don't do work to prevent it. So I understand the question, but I also believe, I understand San's question, but I also understand that there are particular premises that need to be taken into consideration in order to make sense of the fact that essentially the world is much different today. And then, of course, in keeping with the kind of things that you were talking about earlier, Matt, the world is much different today than it was in the past.
We're absolutely organized around the commodity. I mean, we're absolutely organized around the commodity. We still live under what is capitalism. We still live under capitalism as in terms of the market, in terms of the fact that, if you have to work to produce and you have to be able to buy these things, and this pen isn't really a pen, it's really property, it's really this, it's really that, and so is this book, and so is that, and so is this, and everything exists with this like double existence of its use and its so-called exchange value. Yeah, we still live in that world. We absolutely live in that world. But what I'm describing is the fact that that world is becoming untenable, and it's being forced to change. I mean, like, you still had what we would describe as feudalism at a period of time when the mercantilists were rising. I mean, like, and they made it untenable. They made that kind of like land tenure system untenable. And I'm saying that this thing is going to make this thing untenable. I mean, this digital revolution is going to make it untenable. And Martin further says that capitalism, that the capital is part of, that innovation is part of the capital system, and the capitalist mode of production always encourages and creates this whole thing with innovation. But I would say that, like, capital doesn't invent anything. Capital does not invent anything. Capitalism is a word we use to describe how things are organized. But capitalism itself is not this disembodied, empowered thing that pulls strings like a puppet. No. Inventors invent things. People invent things. Nerds invent things. And they take the inventions of previous nerds and they expand upon them. And most of the time, a lot of those things, and if those things can't go into the commodity thing, those inventions will be suppressed, right? But sometimes there are these weird breakthroughs, right? So the history of it is a guy named Robert Noyce invented, with a team of 7 people that he probably ripped off, but got most of the credit for, invented this thing called the microchip. And then that went into just different kind of things, right? And so once a microprocessor goes into production, that creates a qualitative change that sets in motion the entire reason my life has like been so fucked up, like in comparison to my parents, and the reason that a whole generation of people's lives have been so much more precarious, and why their children's lives will be even more precarious. And it's because of this thing that got set in motion that's going to continue. It's going to keep going. It's going to keep moving, and it doesn't happen all at once. But we're seeing an unveiling, ongoing process, and so that doesn't mean that the solutions change. It doesn't mean that I'm not here advocating universal basic income or something like that. No, we got to seize the means of production, whatever those means may be, right? And seize the means of production and put them in the name of the people, and that's what we need to do. And that solution doesn't change. You start talking about automation, people get very nervous because they think you're going to talk about universal basic income, and they think you're going to take it off track of the general kind of revolutionary struggle, right? But the fact of the matter is, no, we need to fight. We need to fight for the public good ownership, the public ownership of the means of production. That's what we're talking about here. That doesn't change. What does change is, like, how do you organize around that? Because if everyone's getting thrown out of work, if everyone's becoming part of this new thing called, like, some describe it as the precariat, if that's becoming the kind of the general outline of where people are at, then trying to organize workers at the point of production when they only make like smaller and smaller percentage of the core of the proletariat, and by proletariat I don't necessarily mean you're working. I mean you need to work. You need to work to eat, right? That's what makes you proletariat. What makes you working class is the fact that you're out there working, right? What makes you a worker is that you're working. What makes you proletariat is that you need to work to live, right? So if the core of the proletariat is being ejected from that worker thing, right, and will be increasingly so, right, that becomes like a shift in attention. That becomes a shift in organization. But the goal doesn't change. The goal is still the seizure of the means of production. So I mean that's kind of where I'm coming from. Now I may be wrong, but I want to be very clear as to where I'm coming from, you know. And so like that's kind of that is my basic point. We have another comment coming from, I shared this in La Raza You Need the page. This comes from a gentleman named by the name of Adam Madrigal. He says, "This is embarrassing," to which I say, read a book, you chipster, and you embarrass yourself. You embarrass future generations. You are an embarrassment. You are a disgrace, going 7 generations backwards and 7 generations forward. All right. Let's see.
All right.
Do we have any other questions? Any other questions? We have reactions, positive things. Zon has a few statements. Do you want to address any of these?
Well, we're past the point where we typically end, but let's take a last one. You know, I only see 4 questions, and we've already addressed them. San writes, thank you, San, for chiming in. San writes, the capitalist problem didn't begin with automation. Let's go back and look at the quantitative easing and fall of the Roman Empire. A monetary policy theory of the fall of Roman money, in a word, is the universal incitement. Iron, the most powerful, he says, instrument of human industry. And it is very difficult to conceive by what means a people, neither actuated by the one nor second by the other, could emerge from the grossest barbarism. I guess he's quoting Edward Gibbon, Joseph Malchow, and the Sovereignty, Technology, and Global Change. I wonder what, I suppose he's talking about that the impetus for the contemporary moment. I guess what San is doing here is he's going back before the forces of primitive accumulation that were addressed in Capital, and he's turning to the Roman Empire and its fall as the impetus, the seed of contemporary capitalism. I don't know what I don't have a response to that. I suppose
it's hard because when we're describing capitalism, right? Especially if we're going to do it through the lens of Marx, right? That begins kind of in Europe in the 1400s, right? So like describe what was going on in Rome as kind of capitalist, or was it kind of capitalist? I mean, maybe, I don't know. Like it's one of those kind of questionable things, but certainly not the origin, because like between the Roman Empire and that, you have a whole other period of, like, especially if we're talking about England, you have a whole period of like, English monarchs who we define what we mean by feudalism by them. So obviously this is not the beginning in Genesis of like, oh, there's the Romans and then like this thing happened. I mean, like, no, there's a very clear history and trajectory that, capitalism kind of begins with the English, the Dutch, and at least to our understanding. Because if you're going to say that the Roman Empire was, well, then certainly the Arab traders of the Silk Road were capitalists. Certainly the Venetians were capitalists. What about the Chinese with their civil servants? I mean, like, what are et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So like, if we're just going to like keep to a kind of a history that we can understand, that's manageable and tenable, I think it's best to keep it over there, right? Yeah. But as far as like what the Romans were up to and what the Romans were doing was highly exploitative. It was highly murderous. It was terrible. It was cruel. And so I'm not talking about automation as being the source of all problems. I'm talking about it as being currently what's happening. It's currently what's divorcing people aware. But these people who rule over today aren't any less evil than the people of yesteryear. And the people of yesteryear aren't any less evil than the people of today. The cruelty and evil of the wealthy, of the rich, of those who are in the commanding heights of all this is not a variable. It's the constant. But the ways in which they can do things, the variable is technology.
Yeah. So we're at the end, Matt. Would you share a poem, and would you do so to bring closure to today's program?
All right, let me do this right now. Let me bring this up. Man. 1 second. 21st century American male wage slave, pushed and prodded, tried and tested, pulled in many directions, culture, religion, a boulder, a mountain, the sun in its position, a life lesson. Something his father had taught him about necktie waterboarding while force-feeding copy and expression with every man a king in a free country. Falling asleep in front of must-see TV, hoping not to wake to see the morning and all its wire and concrete come rushing out its office, something about dreams. Something about alarms being set to something like you're born, you need, you died, now surrender your life, sunrise, sunset. Punch in to paycheck and stolen minutes off the clock in break rooms and barbecues between celebrations and cigarettes, crisis and management, terror and commitment. Somewhere by the roadside, with hollow smiles and the deepest, saddest, most unrequited regret, he gets drunk. He gets loud and very, very quiet. Stumbles around questions like, what is my birthright? To what am I entitled and to whom do I owe? What is the value of a wasted moment? And are we truly as alone as the night appears to be? 21st century American male wage slave, something about freedom, something about ethics, independence, citizenship, a seal, a document, a speech, or was it a dream? Something about being judged by the content of character, not the color of skin, but that was just something that left him wondering why men must be judged at all. And am I truly my brother's keeper? Do the rules change in desperation? If so, why then must we abide by them to begin with? And under what pressures, under what conditions is man's character truly formed? And am I really its content, or merely the document stitched upon birth to the lining of my pockets, the weight of my wallet, the shirt on my back, and the stars made of dust? And am I made of that? And are those mountains not older than nations? So we weep with the passing of children. And are we truly all as alone with nothing but the certainty of death? And if so, why then must I spend my life pressing suits, shining shoes, digging ditches in preparation for my own burial?
It gives one much to think about, and certainly takes to discussions that I've had in the classroom with my students. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you.
Thank you.